All right. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. My name is Darren Morgan. I'm joined with Juan Acosta, and we're going to talk to you about writing your personal statement for college. I'm going to pause for a second and let Juan do his introduction, and we'll get started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Juan Acosta, and I'm a counselor at the Westminster Schools in Atlanta, Georgia. And we'd like to welcome you for joining us tonight. I guess before we start, we're curious to know who's joining us today. So if you could put in the chat whether you are a parent, a counselor, or a student, just so we have an idea of who's here tonight. And then if you are a student or a parent of a student, if you could let us know what grade you're in or your child is in, that way we could have an idea more or less of what's on your mind.
And while you all type, I'll properly introduce myself. So my name is Darren Morgan. I'm the executive director of Arkansas Commitment. We're a nonprofit organization that coaches kids on how to get into college. So I've been in admissions for about 10 years now. So I'm happy to be here to help you guys figure out this essay. So got a student in 11th grade. 11th grade, GAC, okay. Counselor, high school counselor, perfect. So a lot of colleagues here today.
Great, so now that we have an idea of who all is here with us, I guess we could go ahead and get started and dive right into things. And it's good to see that we have some parents and the kids joining us. So if we could go to the next slide, that'd be great. So just to talk a little bit, let's step back a little bit. We're here to talk about the college essay, but I think it's also important for us to talk a little bit first about the different components that go into an evaluation and what colleges are looking for within this process. So first, we have the rigor. And essentially what that means is that a school wants to know whether or not you're challenging yourself with what's offered in your institution. Every school has a different set of classes and offerings. Some schools might have AP courses, some schools might have honors courses, some might not have either. It really just depends on what's offered to you. And so the rigor really depends on how rigorous is your schedule and the classes that you're taking with that. Paired with that is a GPA. And essentially that's really looking at your grades. So you're taking these classes, how are you doing with them? Are you challenging yourself with them and doing well with them? There's always, in admissions, there's that joke, or not joke rather, but the question always comes up of whether a student should take a regular course and get an A, or if they should take an AP course and get a B. And the response always is, take the AP course and get the A. That always gets some sort of a chuckle from people, but essentially, colleges want you to challenge yourself. They want you to do well on them also. And so that's where the GPA comes into play. The extracurricular activities, that could be anything from any organized clubs or organizations at your school to any athletic teams that you might be a part of, either in your school or outside of your school. But also, if you're someone that's taking care of a family member, that could count as an activity. That is something that people or that admissions officers are looking at. So that comes into play as well. If a school requires the SAT or the ACT, so standardized testing, this will factor in as well. And I say if because in recent years, we know that not many students were able to test, or they weren't comfortable enough because of the pandemic sitting for the ACT or the SAT. And so many institutions out there did code test optional, meaning that if a student was able to test, they could submit their scores. But if you couldn't, or perhaps if you weren't happy with the scores you received, then you wouldn't have to submit them. Some schools might also be test blind. And what that essentially means is that even if you submitted your test, the schools will not look at them or use them as part of their evaluation. And lastly, what we're here to talk about today is the essay, right? And this is a chance for you to talk about yourself and explain who you are to the admissions committee, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into what that means and why that's important. But essentially, the essay can tip the scale in your favor if any of these other factors maybe aren't necessarily where they should be at this point. So we go on to the next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about how different colleges might read their application. And so typically you'll see two different types of ways that they read these applications. The data-driven read essentially is looking at your grades, they're looking at your classes, and they're looking, if they ask for scores, at your scores. And so some schools might have a chart that says if a student has a certain GPA and a certain test score that the institution believes makes them admissible, then you could get into that school. So they're evaluating you based on your numbers. Other schools might be using a holistic read. And essentially this means that they're looking at the whole application. They're looking at the entirety of who the applicant is. So the numbers do come into play as well. They may be looking at your scores and your grades and your classes also, but that's when they're looking at your recommendations. How are you as a student? How do you contribute to your community? They're looking at your activities, they're looking at any awards, and they're looking at the essays as well when it comes to this particular read. So what do we know about essays? Well, typically, again, this is the highest ranked non-academic feature of an application. And as more and more colleges are relying less on data points, the importance of the essay is bigger. So if a school is going test blind, for instance, or they're test optional, there are other ways for them to know whether you are a match for the institution. And often they will look at your responses to their essays to determine whether or not you might be admissible and a good fit for them. And so the essays and the personal statements, it's the one thing that you as a student can control, right? Because it's your responses, it's what you have to say to the school. And so it really does all land on you, and you control what you say in these responses. Let's see, we go to the next one. So the purpose of the essay, it's really the closest way for you to have an actual conversation with an admission officer. And so admissions officers want you to be authentic. Often I'll meet with students who think that they need to, how they're responding to the prompts and to the essays, they're responding to them in a way that they feel like it will impress the admissions officer. And in reality, they just want you to be yourself. They want you to be authentic. They want you to show them what your interests are, add some personality in there. If you're naturally someone who makes people laugh, it's okay to use that kind of a personality within your essays, right? And so I think often, and also this is a very different type of essay, perhaps than what you're used to. It's not a formal essay that you would write for your English class. This is really a little bit more informal. It's about you. So just be yourself when you're looking at this piece. It gives the admissions offices an insight as to who you are, how you think, how you process things. Depending on the essay you're responding to, it could be the personal essay or the supplemental essay, which we'll get into the difference between the two. It lets them see how you will be able to contribute to the classroom environment when you're there. And it is a process, right? You aren't going to sit down and write an essay overnight. If some of you might be talented writers and you might be able to do that, that's great. But for the majority of us, at least I know for me, it is a process. It does take time to think about what I want to say. And then there does come a lot of editing and re-editing with that as well. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. So what do colleges want to know with these essays? They want to know why they should pick you and whether or not you will be a good fit for that school. Are you a good fit? Will you contribute to our community? And will you add to the diversity of our school? And so we are going to touch on two different types of essays. The name of the session is how to write an essay in 700 words or less. And so typically that will be the focus of the main essay, which we will touch on. The main essay is, in theory, one essay. Let's say you're applying to through the Common Application, which many institutions are part of. You would write one main essay. And essentially this essay would go to all the schools that you're applying to. The max is 650 words to this particular essay. And further down, we'll share some prompts with you with what this year's questions are. But I often hear a lot of students really overthink what this main essay should be, and you should. You should think about it. You should put some thought and time into it. But on the other hand, there are also some supplemental essays that some schools may ask you to write. So these additional essays are often a way that schools will see whether or not you're a good fit for them. More often than not, a lot of these responses are, why us? So why do you want to apply to my institution? And or why do you want to study your chosen major at my institution? And I would say that these supplemental essays, which are often a lot shorter, can be more important than perhaps the main essay, because again, it goes with that fit with that institution. So for those of you that are juniors, most of you are juniors, when you get to that point where you're working on these essays, give it the time that is necessary, because these have as much value as your main Common App essay. So when we talk about the personal essay, so exactly what is that, right? It's a personal narrative. You're talking about yourself. You're using the I. They want you to focus on statements that relate to you as a student. This is really the opportunity to talk about who you are, to share your experiences. We can't overemphasize that this is about you. And I say that because often I will see some essays where a student is writing either about a friend or about a family member, or they're writing about someone important to them in their community. And it's a beautifully written tribute about that person, but it tells us nothing about the student. Or they're writing about an organization that they're part of. And we learned a lot about the organization or the club or the sport, but then it doesn't really tell us anything about the student either. So again, it really is important that you are writing about yourself, that what you're learning, what you're experiencing, that all comes through in this essay. And then we want it to be the student's voice, right? And so parents out there, if you're tempted to write the essay for your child, maybe don't, because admissions officers who are reading thousands of applications a year can't discern what a 40-something-year-old adult sounds like versus what a high school student may sound like. So just be authentic to who you are, to your voice. This isn't a time to, look up and listen. I did this when I was in high school. I was writing my essay. I had some words and I looked up the thesaurus and I put in some fancy words because I thought it would fit in with my essay, and it didn't. I found my college essay not so long ago. It was terrible, but I was trying to show the admission office that I was someone else that I wasn't. So use the words you normally use. This isn't a time to try to impress the reader. This is a time to be your authentic self with what you're presenting about yourself to the admission office. And so just to talk a little bit about the prompts for this year, these are the questions. I won't read them verbatim, but you could see that of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 questions, each touch on different points. So the first one is about background, identity, interest, or talent. The second one is about a lesson you've learned from an obstacle. The other one about something that questioned your challenges or your belief, something that has motivated you, something that sparked a period of growth or understanding of yourself, and then any topic, idea, or a concept that's engaging to you. And then lastly, topic of your choice. But essentially with any of these, going back to my previous point, you want to make sure that you are showing the reader who you are and that your voice is there and that they could learn more about you. So another way to think about this is when you're writing your applications, you will fill out a lot of variables. You're talking about what classes you're taking, you're talking about your activities, you're talking about who your family is, but this is the time to show them something that they couldn't necessarily see in other parts of your application. So this is the time to expand on who you are and give them something else to know about you. Essentially, it's a snapshot of who you are that they wouldn't necessarily find in any other part of the application. And so I'm going to hand it over to Darren at this point.
All right, so like Juan said, and thank you for that, Juan. With all of these essay topics, the 7 different topics, they seem like they're asking different questions, right? But if you focus on the Black print, topic number 1 is a background, identity, interest, or talent that is meaningful to the student. Number 2 is the lesson that we take from obstacles. Number 3 is question or challenge of personal belief. So all of these questions are really asking about how have you grown over the last 4 years? And that's what we're really trying to dig down into with these questions. Who are you right now? What are you passionate about? But how have you grown over the past 4 years? Because the student that you were in 9th grade should not be who you are in the 12th grade. And we need to see that growth because we're looking to see that fit. If you're gonna fit into our community and our culture. So we want you to tell your story in a way that will also show fit. And I'll show you how to do that as we go, actually on this slide. So the first thing to remember is, who are you? Telling your story. Like Juan said, I want you to think about this like a written interview. And in every interview, the first question you'll always get is, so tell me about yourself, right? And everyone hates that tell me about yourself question, especially my high school students, because you freeze up. We've always been taught not to brag, not to boast, but then we wait until you're a senior in college to tell you to go ahead and brag and boast, right? So we get uncomfortable being vulnerable and telling our stories and talking about who we are and what made us who we are today. But that's what we're looking for in these essays. We don't need the biographical information. We don't need a list of extracurriculars because they're already going to have that in your application. What they're truly looking for in these essays is, who are you? What are your passions? How have you grown? And if you will fit into the community and the culture. Before you start writing, I think the first step in the process, honestly, should just be to relax. So you know what they're looking for. You know yourself better than anybody else. So relax, take a deep breath, and then I want you to think of what I call essence objects, 10 words that really describe who you are. So that is where you start this brainstorming process to figure out, if you weren't in school today, how would you want everyone to describe you? How would you want your friends to say, like, just to look at the chat, if I asked, who is Pamela? What 10 words would Pamela want the class to say? Of course, everybody's gonna say smart, dedicated, hardworking, a good person, I'm friendly, but dive a little bit deeper. What makes you unique? What makes you you? Everybody has certain characteristics, certain attributes. This is the time to really dive deep into what those 10 words are you want to describe yourself as, and let that be the skeleton of your essay. So I always tell my students, take those 10 words, stick them to the side. And if you really want to expound on them, go ahead and draw a line next to those words and remind yourself why you said that about yourself. So if you're really smart, why do you say you're really smart? If you're a budding politician, why do you say you're a budding politician? What attributes, what plays into that? Make those notes for yourself, because the next step of that is to dig deep. So tell a story that is meaningful. So think of a story that really showcases your best features. So all those 10 words that you just gave us, think about what story in your life can you use all 10 of those, or that you can draw on and say, this is the moment that I learned all 10 of these skills, or all 10 of these, I don't know, characteristics about myself. But this is the incident or the experience that shaped me into the person I am today. So make sure you tell a lesson that you've learned. You can start thinking about maybe what's the hardest thing you've ever had to overcome. You can think about, what do you want to be and why? If you want to be a doctor, what about your background? What motivated you? What inspired you, or who inspired you to become a doctor? That's what you need to pinpoint. Now, the last point is fit. You've heard that term thrown around a lot so far. And as you go through high school, you're going to hear that term thrown around even more with colleges. I want you to think about fit as a community. Every college is really a community in a sense. We all have different types of students on campus. You have your musicians, your student government leaders, your science majors, political science majors, just different personalities and different interests make up that campus. And with these essays, we're trying to figure out where you fit in. Now, a trick to this is to really think about those colleges that you're looking at. And this will also help with the supplemental essay as well. But think about those colleges that you're looking at. If you had a chance to go on a tour, to talk to an admissions counselor, to talk to current students, they all kind of allude to this set personality that they're looking for on their campus. They love students that collaborate. They love students that want a global perspective. They love students that are civic minded and get engaged in the community, right? So every college has that, and you can actually get a good sense of what it is by looking at the college's website, in particular the history page and the about page. Go on a tour, or right now you can go on a virtual tour and listen to those key points that the admissions counselors keep selling. That is what they're showing you they want in the ideal typical student. This is the student that we're looking for in our culture. A student that does these things will be the type of student that will thrive at XYZ college, right? So in your essays, while you're thinking about that story that showcases your best feature, also think of a story that will allow you to mirror those values back to those colleges. So if a college saying they love students that's civic minded, if you have a story where you actually got involved in the community, talk about that and show how you picked up all these values through something that you already know is important to the college. Next up is the blank piece of paper. So this is the time when you can actually start writing. And again, like Juan said, these are personal essays. These are narrative statements. So it's okay to use I statements, and you should use I statements, but you also want to limit those I statements as well. You don't want an essay that's full of, I did this, I was involved in this, I did that, because it's not a compelling story. The more I statements you use in an essay, the less compelling it becomes. Like if you're talking to a friend and you ask them how was their day, and they started it off with, well, today I woke up at 8, I brushed my teeth at 8:30, I took a shower at 9, went through the long list of activities throughout their day, you will get bored. I statements kind of do that. It's not compelling. It's not a great way to tell the story. It's just kind of describe or listing everything you did. But in this case, with these essays, you want to stand out. You want to be unique. So you want to not tell your story, but sell your story in a way that the admissions counselor loves reading it. It's going to draw somebody in. If you were a salesman and you wanted to sell an iPhone, just using that description because it's right here. If you want to sell your iPhone, you're not going to say it's a phone, it can make calls, I can get text messages on it. That's kind of boring. You're going to sell it, right? Like if you go into the Apple store, they're going to tell you this is the iPhone 13. It has 4 cameras on the back that can take pictures that look 3D, all the great stuff, descriptors that make it exciting to even think about. And same thing with reading. Your admissions counselor has to read a lot of essays. So you want something that they're going to remember, that they're going to really remember, and that's going to stand out from the crowd. If you're still stuck, I want you to start here. Remember this slide. If you want to check out the book I got this from, it is The Enlightened College Applicant. It's a great book for students as well as counselors. It really covers everything from holistic admissions to financial aid. It's a great resource for everyone. But start on this slide here. So every student will fall into one of 4 categories. And this is worst case scenario. You hit that writer's block, you can't think about anything else. So start thinking about which category you fall in. Category A is you have faced a significant challenge in your life and you know what you want to major in. B is you have not faced a significant challenge and you know what you want to major in. C is you have faced a challenge, but you don't know what you want to do. And D is you have not faced a challenge and you don't know what you want to do. So every student finds a box. For me, I would take box A because that's the example I'm going to use going forward. Let's say you have faced a challenge and you know what you want to major in. That is a great place to start because we already have 2 key points down. We have that story, that challenge that you faced, and now you know what you want to be in the future, what you want to major in, or the career that you're aspiring to be. So we can kind of merge those together. So if you had a challenge that taught you, let's say, how to use your voice, maybe to stand up for people that were underrepresented, right? To use your platform for others. And now you want to be a politician later on in life. That is how you can kind of merge those 2 passions together. So you have faced that challenge, and each challenge that you went through, especially that one in particular, you don't come out of a challenge the same person that you went in. So you learn skills, you learn resources, you learn talents, and all those things are going to be something that's helpful and tools that's helpful in whatever career or major you want to go on. So we're going to pick box A for this. So now I want you to rethink the question. Now is not the 7 essay topics that they put up there. It's not a time you overcame an obstacle. It's not a time or the most influential person in your life. Now the question really becomes, how do the challenges or experiences from your past connect to your present? In business, they tell you to always ask the 5 whys. Why is this? 5 times, and then you get a really, really deep answer, right? So if you're trying to face a problem, ask yourself why. So if your phone doesn't work, why doesn't my phone work? The power won't cut on. Why doesn't the power cut on? And it makes you dive deeper just naturally. For these essays, I want you to ask yourself the 5 whats. What challenge did you face? What kind of impact or influence did this challenge have on you? I spelled that wrong, my bad. What action did you take to overcome these challenges? What skills, resources, or values did you gain as a result of going through them? And the last one, in what way will these resources, skills, or values help you in a future major or career? And then take all of those things, those 5 points, and plug them in this box down here. Now, the great thing about these essays is only 650 words. And a lot of y'all, I know teenagers can text. You probably text your friends more than 650 words by accident, right? So it's really quick, but they're 650 words that really breaks down to about 5 paragraphs. So I want you to use this as a frame for what your essay is really going to become. This shouldn't be the essay. This should just be the guideline, the final step in your brainstorming process to help you map everything out. The last step after this should really be to think about those values of the college, think about that challenge and how it impacted you, and merge those two together in a story that your admissions counselor is really gonna love. Now, when we talk about how to tell your story, depending on which box you fall in, just to go back, you're gonna tell your story 1 or 2 ways. If you have faced a challenge and you know what you wanna do, or let's say you have faced a challenge anyway. So A or C, you have faced a challenge at some point in your life. Because you have faced a challenge, you had to go through, you took steps to actually get through that challenge. So the way you're gonna tell that story is in a narrative format, chronological order, as a clear beginning, a clear climax, and a clear ending. If you haven't faced a challenge, but you know what you wanna be, or you've never faced a challenge at all, then you've picked up different skills throughout your life, right? It may not have been through one incident, it could be through several incidents, but all of those help shape you to become who you are today. So that's the category you fall in, B or D. You can tell your story in a montage format. And I'll get into those in a little bit, but the narrative format, like I said, one moment leads to the next. The status quo, everything was perfect. Until this happened, then you realize it needs to change. So you took these steps, and as a result, you gain these values, right? That's narrative. It has a clear beginning, middle, and end. The montage, you have the freedom to kind of bounce around. Everything doesn't have to fall in chronological order. You could have learned something at 12, and then you learned something at 5, learned something again at 17, and all of those instances kind of merge together to make you who you are. They taught you a lesson as they go, and that is what the montage is. So we got a little time. I'm gonna show a couple of clips. I'm gonna be really brief with both of them because I don't want to take up too much of your time. But everyone has seen Up, and this is a great example of a narrative. I'm not sure if you can hear it. Can you all throw in the chat if you can actually hear the screen? All right. Okay, bet. If you can't hear it, I'll stop it here. But everyone's seen the cartoon Up. It's a great movie. The first 5 minutes, they followed the life of a married couple, a newlywed couple, where they start out as kids, and then we go until adolescence, and then young adulthood, then they get married, live a long life, and make all these plans, right? So that's narrative. They start young, and you can follow the progression of their life as they go. The second one, and I'll be even quicker with this one, I love Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and this is a great clip that shows that. And if everyone's seen the show before, we know the background, that he was from Philly, ran out of town from a bully. He went back to town in this clip and was preparing to go fight the bully, right? He didn't actually go fight him in this movie, but we know on one day he was eating eggs, another day he was running around to get some endurance. Another day he was sparring, and all of these things kind of made him who he is, right? It helped him little by little become a great boxer. So he really tried, and we don't know whether he went running on Monday, went running on Tuesday, went jogging on Thursday, but none of that matters because all of these kind of made him who he is as a boxer, right? So those are the two different ways to tell your story, either as a narrative or as a montage. But it's totally up to you how you want to tell it and how you want to sell your story. But just remember to make it compelling in either way. Now, we do have a couple of examples of some great essays. I want everyone to remember this website, the Davidson College Google Essay Project. And what it is a really great resource. I'm going to show it to you in 1 second. And what Davidson did a few years back is they started taking out some really great excerpts from essays. I'm going to stop the share and reshare it so you can see it. All right, so the admissions counselors, as they're reading through the essays, they're taking out those clips that made them say, wow, this is a really great one. This is one that I need to pass around the office, the one that I need to show other students so that they can follow suit, and also make some really great essays. If you go to this website, again, it's the Google Essay Project, Davidson College. You can click on different states. And I know a lot of y'all are from Georgia, so let's pick a Georgia one real quick. All right, so in this one, let's see if we like any in particular. So I'm bouncing around. I'm from North Carolina, I'm from Atlanta, but I found this one earlier that I really liked. All right, so this is a student that ran for SGA, but the way they told that story of how they lost was kind of interesting. Just to describe it or to read it to you. As I began to reflect on my loss, I realized that this was a true let it be moment. I had to let go of the pain of losing, embrace the new student body president, and move on. It was only at this point that I began to see the silver lining to this gray cloud. With the excess time that I now have, I've decided to begin a research project for the North Carolina Science and Engineering Fair. I am very excited about the work and find it just as fulfilling as my work on student government. So they took the defeat and they actually made it a really interesting story about their science project. So they shifted from one love, which was student government, to another, which is now science. Another one from Little Rock. This is where I live now. I have fallen in love 3 different times throughout my life. I did not love 3 different people, but I love the same person who evolved and changed 3 different times as naturally and drastically as butterflies that emerge from their cocoons, even more beautiful than they entered. My first love occurred at an age when microwaves and bookshelves were beyond my grasp, and deciding between Blue's Clues and Bambi was my principal worry. So they told it in a really, really interesting way. Like, we still don't know who they're talking about at this point, but just this small excerpt, this one paragraph was interesting. It almost reads like a novel. It's not a list of I statements. You know, they do use I, but it's telling the story that you want to learn more about. Just reading this clip, now you want to know the rest of what's going on in their life. So the Google Essay Project is definitely a great place to start. I'm going to go back to the presentation. All right, so in Juan, you're up. Supplemental essays.
Thank you, Darren, for that. And I will say, just to add to that, just one thing that I always tell my students is you want to find a way to grip the reader. And I feel like the examples that Darren shared definitely want to keep the reader wanting to learn more about that student, right? And so how are you going to think of it this way? If you were reading an essay and you've been reading essays all day and it's 10 p.m., what's going to keep you interested and what's going to make you want to read more? And so I think these examples that he shared are great. That last one really pulled at my heartstrings. So I'm going to have to find the full version somehow of it, but that's a great example to share. But we talked about the big personal essay, but I don't want us to not think about the supplemental essays either, because these are, as I mentioned earlier, they can be as important as the main Common App essay. And often this essay really asks the why us question. Why do you want to attend my institution, right? And so you want to be specific with what you're saying and conveying about that school. You want to make sure that you're meeting what their philosophy is. And you could kind of see this. We'll share some examples later on about different types of questions that are asked. And And that could give you an idea of what they're looking for as for members in their community. And you want to make sure that after every time you visit with a representative, either through Zoom, through an information session, if you're able to visit the campus, that you do make a quick journal entry about what you liked about the school, things you remember, things that will stick with you, because these things will help you as you work these supplemental essays. So if we go to the next slide, we'll give you a couple of examples that are out there right now. So these are current examples of supplemental essays for this year. So the University of Georgia asks, the college admissions process can create anxiety. In an attempt to make it less stressful, please tell us an interesting or amusing story about yourself from your high school years. And so an essay like this, they really just want an amusing or interesting story about yourself. And sometimes we'll find students who really overthink what this response should be. In some ways, it can be counterproductive because they're using it to create less anxiety, but then students get a little bit anxious about trying to be funny with their responses. And so, or with the story that they're sharing. But backing up a little bit, every school will have different things that they may be looking for, right? So in addition to the main common app essay, every school will have something. It could be the why us essay. It could be that they're asking you 2 short answer questions in addition to the main common app essay. It could be that some schools will ask for 8 short answer questions, or they might ask you to come up with a list of things and you determine what that list is. Some essays might be 150 words. Most of them are around 250, 300. Some schools might say, hey, here's an opportunity for you to share whatever it is that you want to share, and you have 500 words to do so. So every school will be different. In some ways, the best way to approach these is look at all the schools that you're interested in applying to and maybe list all those questions in one document. Because often you might find that for a lot of these questions, it's the same question asked differently. And so you want to make sure that you are tailoring your answer to each of the schools, but at the same time, you also want to work smart. And if the opportunity is there for you to perhaps repurpose a response while still making it focused on that specific institution, that's what you should do. So some schools will provide some prompts that really, it's just a time for you to relax and you're writing an amusing story about yourself. Other schools like Emory, they want to know why you're interested in exploring whatever it is you want to learn. So these are 2 different examples. One is, what academic areas are you interested in exploring in college? So they want to know about your academic interests. Another one is, when was the last time you questioned something? So they're looking to see how you think, what you want to further explore while in school. If we look at Chapel Hill's questions, one of them is describe a peer that you see as a community builder. What actions has that peer taken? And how has your work made a difference in your life? And so going back to the example of the main common app essay, I've read beautifully written responses about tributes to their friends, but then sometimes these responses won't tell me how it had an effect on the student themselves. So you want to make sure in instances like this that you're answering all aspects of the question. So really the highlight is, this friend, this peer of yours, what makes them this community builder, and how did their actions have an effect on you? And essentially the answer is about you and how something they did, how it affected you. Other schools might ask for you to just really think out of the box, and they want to see how you think and how you write. And so, for instance, University of Chicago, one of their prompts this year is, what's so easy about pi? They really are thinking to see if you could think outside of the box, to see how you think, to see how you write. In the past, one of the prompts was find X. One of my favorite prompts in the past was, where is Waldo really? And so while some schools are looking to see whether or not you've done your research within that institution, others are looking to see how you are as a writer and a thinker. And that could go ahead and tell you what it is you're valuing in their applicants. And then I put this last one in here. Please describe why you're interested in Tulane. So this is the why Tulane. For them, it's optional, but often if a supplemental essay says it's optional, it probably isn't, right? At a place like Tulane, they're using this prompt as a way of demonstrated interest. So it might seem like a trick question, and in some ways it is, but unless the prompt really doesn't apply to you and they say this is really optional, if it says it's optional, it probably isn't. So you might want to talk to your counselor about whether or not you should be approaching that essay. I will say one thing also. Right now, these are the prompts for this year. And I think because I think the majority of you are juniors in school, you might be tempted to say, hey, I'm going to get a head start and start working on these essays, which is a great way to think about it. And perhaps the main Common App essay could be something you could brainstorm probably further closer towards the summer. Right now, we want you to stay focused in your classes and your grades as well. But the supplemental essays can change from year to year. And most schools won't put their updated essays until August. So I've had students who want to have a jump start and they start working on these essays only to find a month or two later that it's a completely different prompt. So it's good to brainstorm and to keep those journals about what you like from a school and what stood out. But keep in mind that these supplemental essays might change from year to year. If we go to the next slide, I think we have an example.
Before we go, let me add a little bit to that one too.
Sure.
So I know a lot of times when we think about like the two different types of essays, I think a great way to think about it is when it comes to the Common App, we're thinking about why you, right? I know a lot of you all go to Greater Atlanta Christian, great school in North Cross, Georgia. Tons of classes offer like AP classes galore. What makes you different from everybody else? How do you stand out from the crowd at GAC, right? That's really what we're trying to get to. What makes you stand out? But the supplementals is out of the 4,000 colleges in America, why us? So definitely do your research on that one and have some real reasons on why you want to go to that school. I tell my students to do some deep research. If you are really into biomedical engineering and there's a professor on campus doing that particular type of biomedical engineering that you love, maybe talk about how you're excited or just mention how you're excited to work with that professor at some point. But they're really looking to make sure you know that school, you know that community, you know that culture. So make sure you include that in that essay. All right.
And I think this slide is a perfect example of that and how you should really do your research and giving the details to that specific school. So if you notice here, I'll give you all time to read this essay, but just a couple of things to point out. The student talks about when they visited. They talk about things that are specific to Davidson. They talk about specific buildings as well. And so you want to make sure, again, that you are talking about the details as they pertain to that specific school. Another way to think about this is if somebody found this particular response, would that response fit to any other school that you're applying to, right? Sometimes we'll have students who write about, let's say they want to go to NYU, and they talk about what a great town New York City is and everything New York City has to offer, and the internships they could do in New York City, but then they're not specific to NYU. You could potentially take that particular essay and apply it to Fordham or apply it to Columbia or any other school in New York City. And so you want to make sure that you are including the details as specifically as you can to that particular school. And so at this point, we welcome any questions that you all may have. Darren, do you have any final thoughts at this point?
Again, my main point, I always tell my students just to relax. Trust me, I know it sounds stressful and it sounds like a daunting process, but nobody knows you better than yourself. One other piece now I think about and I started talking is to know your audience as well. A lot of times we think about admissions counselors, and Juan's story about writing his essay kind of made me think about it, right? when we sat down as 17-year-olds, we assumed that our admissions counselor was some old gray-haired guy, right? That's been in office for 60 years. So I got to break out the thesaurus because that's how they talk. And that's not quite the case at all. Most admissions counselors, from what I've seen, are like, what, 21 to 25, maybe a little bit older than that starting out. And when you think about who comes to your schools, they're kind of young. So you don't have to use these big elaborate words, but also they also remember that community and that culture as well from the school. So especially for that why us, you're talking to somebody that's more or less just out of that school. So that Davidson essay that Juan just read, I'm actually a Davidson alum. If I was still in admissions council, that would actually pull at my heartstrings and make me reminisce a little bit about all the times I ate at Toast or walked up the chambers. And those are ways to kind of hook that admissions counselor in and show them that you know that school. So relax again, do your research on these schools, but really it's not as stressful as you think.
Let's see. So one of the questions that came in through the chat is about topics that are out of bounds. And then in particular, something revolving around mental health. So I think, and even though I may not look at 20 years ago, I was in the admission side as a young admissions officer. But back then, I think, honestly, when a student wrote about mental health, I think it was seen as a red flag. I think now, because students are much more comfortable speaking about some of their mental health issues, I think, this is my opinion, one myself as an individual, that I think those topics are okay to touch upon. I think the importance with just topics in general, and I'll let Darren chime in as well, is yes, you could talk about your mental health issues, but how have you perhaps overcome those mental health issues? Or how did that get you to where you are today? And so it's also, I think, in how you approach it. So some instances, some students might write about any adversities they've gone through. They're talking about mental health or anything else that they might want to speak about. And it could come off as very woe is me. And in some ways, they aren't necessarily talking about the growth that came from that experience. So I think it all comes down to how have you grown from that? Darren, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm very close to you. But I always say when we get to these type topics, to be careful, right? Because you don't want to just flood the admissions council with negativity. You definitely want to stay positive in these essays. This is your one shot to talk about how great you are. And the admissions counselor is going to get about, depending on the school, 3,000, 6,000, 10,000 essays where students are just talking about how great they are and positivity and all that great stuff. For essays like mental health, it's okay to tap on it, in my opinion, but you don't want that to be the central focus of your essay. If you do, just like Juan said, you want to talk about how you overcame or how it taught you a life experience, but definitely flip it into a positive and don't just talk about your struggle. To another point is a lot of students talk about the obstacle itself in all of these essays and the challenge that they had to go through. And honestly, that is not what the admissions counselor is looking for, because everybody has some kind of challenge or obstacle. The person reading your essay is going to have some kind of obstacle. So they're not impressed by that, but how you grew from that obstacle and how you change is really what you should focus on, even in a mental health essay. But really good question. And while y'all think of other topics I can think of out of bounds, just from my time in reading, relationship essays. You know, I know you love your boyfriend, your girlfriend, but this doesn't need to be a journal entry to talk about it. And other tips, maybe for the next couple minutes, we can just talk about tips and best practices, but be unique. I can say this now that I'm on the other side of the desk, but there's certain essay topics that I can tell you what you're gonna read, what I'm about to read as soon as I hit that first line, you know? Sometimes we joke about it and say mission trip essays or sports essays or something that are so common. Like with the sports rehab essay, the pretty much follow the same script. A student got hurt, they rehabbed, they came back better than ever. And that's the analogy about life, right? Mission trip essays, a student went to another country, they played a lot of soccer and they came back and realized that, those people were just so happy and that's what they want to bring back to the States. But in both of those, especially the mission trip, what did we learn about you? Learned a lot about the country you went to, learned a lot about the kid you played soccer with, but the focus wasn't on you, it was on the trip. With the sports rehab, the focus is on the injury itself and how you came back from that injury. But again, it's not on you and your mental growth or your personal growth. So make sure you keep the focus on you at all times. And any other, go ahead, sorry, Juan.
Yeah, one tip that I'll also say is oftentimes it feels like you need to sit down and have a fully developed essay, and that could be great for you, but perhaps you just have ideas. So maybe just as you think of ideas, get your phone out and type in just different things you might want to write about, right? Or I suggest to some students, maybe in the earlier steps of the process, perhaps they just write a couple of sentences for each idea that they're thinking about. And then you could think about what you would go and write about from there. So don't feel like you have to sit down and at that point you have to write 650 words in one sitting, right? It is a process and it might take a while for you to come up with what your topic will be. And if anybody knows anything about you, it's yourself, right? So just make sure that you stay true to who you are, think about what you want that admissions officer to know about you, and then just start writing down different things that you would want them to gain and learn from you and about you.
And just for anyone interested, I went ahead and put the link to the Davis and Google essay project in the chat. So feel free to play around with that, get a couple of ideas. But again, I'm gonna keep saying this, just relax in this process. You have way more time than you think. Nobody knows you better than you. Just talk about what you know best, which is yourself. All right, any other last minute questions? If not, thank you so much for hopping on. Really hope this was helpful and will help you make the perfect college essay.
Thank you all.